Today's lesson is lesson number 72. We're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. I should say this anyways. So quadratic equations we've been working with, that's when we have a square term. And then factoring is what we spent our whole last unit on. Okay, so we're just really building on what we did last unit. Okay, so here are our steps. The first thing you want to do is move everything to one side so that you have like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, so if you start out with like equals 4, you can just subtract 4 from both sides so that you have an equation that's equal to 0. Okay. Once you do that, you're going to factor the quadratic trinomial. So that's just something that looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, you're just going to factor that using Xbox most of the time like we've been doing. You should still probably look for a GCF. Okay. And then after that, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. Okay, the reason we do that is this thing called the zero product property. So think about if we had 5 times x equals 0, what does x have to be? Without doing any work, you should know there's a certain number that x has to be in order for this to be true. What's that number? 0, right? The only way that I can start with 5 and multiply it a certain number of times but end up with 0 is if I'm multiplying by 0. Okay, so this property basically says if I have two things, so if I have, say, a times b equals 0, so I have two things or two numbers and I multiply them together, I get 0, one of them must be a 0. Or both could be, but really one of them must be a 0. So if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0. Okay, this part down here in the brackets is the definition of the zero product property. So you might want to include that in your notes. Okay, so once you set each of the factors, so in our case, a and b are going to be factors. Okay, so it might be like x plus 2 times x minus 1 equals 0. And then that means you can set each of those equal to 0. And you'll solve each of those equations for the variable. First thing I'm doing for number 1 is making sure that I have an equation that's equal to 0. Okay, that's the first thing. This is, so I'm good to move on to the next step, which is to factor my quadratic. Okay, I'm looking here, do I have a GCF? No, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use Xbox. I'll set up my Xbox, I put a 1 on either side, because that's my like a term. A times c is just 1 times 6, so I put a 6 up top, and then the middle term goes down below, so that's a 5. Now I'm looking for factors of 6 that add to 5. I know I have 1 times 6 or 3 times 2, and they both need to be either positive or negative in order for me to get a positive 6, so I can get that with positive 3 times positive 2, and I know that those add up to 5, so those are the correct factors to use here. Okay, now I'm going to look at my Xbox and look at these fractions, see if I can simplify them at all, which I can't. So I'll write my factored expression. Bringing these down, I have b plus 3 from the green rectangle, or the green fraction, and then b plus 2 from the blue rectangle. Okay, but I still have equals 0. Okay, that's that new addition, right? So instead of just the expression, I have all of that equals 0. Okay, now since I have a product of two things that equals 0, okay, a product equaling 0, I get to use the zero product property. So I can say, okay, if this times this equals 0, then either b plus 3 equals 0 or b plus 2 equals 0. Okay. And then I'm on to step number 4, which is to solve for the variable in each of these equations. The green equation, I do that by just subtracting 3 from both sides, so I get b equals negative 3. And in the blue equation, I get that by subtracting 2, so I get b equals negative 2. Okay, so those are my two answers here. Okay, you guys have been practicing before you learned how to solve equations that maybe just looked like 5b plus 6 equals 0. Okay, you didn't have this square term here. Right, so you've learned how to do that, and there's always one solution, right? You get one thing. Here, since we have a squared term, you can get two solutions. Okay, so all that this means is that if I plug in -3, which I did down here, so if I were to plug in -3 for b, I would get -3 squared plus 5 times -3 plus 6, which is just 9 minus 15 plus 6, which is just -6 plus 6. And that equals 0, right? So plugging in -3 makes my equation true. Okay, that means it's a solution. But I could also plug in -2 and it works as well. So if I plug in -2, -2 squared is just going to give me 4. 5 times -2 is -10. So then I have -6 plus 6 again, which equals 0. Okay, so both of these are solutions. Is that okay? Okay, focus up here for number 2, and then we'll go over both of them. Okay, so number 2 is similar. First, I'm going to make sure that it's set equal to 0. It is, so I'm good to move on to step 2, which is factoring. Factoring, I think back to last chapter. I see if there's a GCF. There's not. So I'm going to go ahead and use Xbox on this. Okay, I set it up. That gives me 3 on either side. 3 times -6 gives me -18 up top. And then the middle term is 17, so that goes below. Then I'm looking for factors of -18 that I can add to 17. So if I just do positive 18 and -1, that'll give me what I need. Okay, so now I'm looking at the fractions. I see that I can simplify this. It's just 1 over 6. And then this one I can't simplify anymore. Okay, I'm going to use those to write my factored expression. So I get v plus 6 from the first fraction. 3 over -1 is going to go to 3v minus 1. And remember, I still have all of this equal to 0. Okay, since I have a product equal to 0, I get to use the 0 product property. So I split it up. I set each one equal to 0. So either v plus 6 equals 0 or 3v minus 1 equals 0. Okay, then I solve for the variable by solving each of these little equations, which for the first one I could subtract 6, so I get v equals -6. And the second one I start by adding 1 to both sides. That gives me 3v equals 1. And then I divide by 3 to get v by itself. So I get v equals 1/3. Okay, and those would be my final answers. So if I plug in -6 for v, I would get 0 equals 0, so I'd get a true statement. If I plug in 1/3 for v, I would also get 0 equals 0. Okay, so on number 3, I'm looking first, is it equal to 0?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to factor this. Talk to your partner about what the first thing we should do here to factor this is. Okay, I hear Xbox, I hear difference of squares. I don't hear the right answer. What is it? GCF. Guys, let's think about difference of squares really quick. Difference of squares, you need both of them to be a perfect square. What do I get if I take the square root of 4k? I agree the 4 comes out as a 2 root k. That k isn't a perfect square. It doesn't come out. Right? It doesn't have a buddy to break out with him. So, the first thing we want to do, though, is you see they both have a k in common. You should always check GCF first. No matter what other method you want to use, GCF always you check for first. So, we see there's a GCF, so I'm going to factor that out. Okay, GCF is k, so on your iPads, I want to see what you get when you factor out the k. What goes in the parentheses? Good, so k minus 4 goes here.
What?
Uh-oh. There. K minus 4 goes in the parentheses, and it's all equal to what? Equals 0. Okay, so now, guys, focus up here. Do you see that I just have two things being multiplied to each other equaling 0? Does everyone see that? It's a product equaling 0. So I get to use the 0 product property. So I set each of these pieces equal to 0. So just 10 seconds really quickly. Show me the two final answers that you get. One of them's already solved for. Just solve for k in the other equation and show me your answer on your iPads. So if these are my two equations, I already have one of them solved for. The other one over here, if I add 4 to both sides, that gives me k equals 4. Okay, so those are my two answers. Okay, why don't you take a second and talk with your partner about this problem. Tell them if you made a mistake, where you made a mistake, or what was confusing. Let them know if you have a question and they can help answer it, or if you guys want to ask me. Number 4 is already equal to 0, so I'm done with step number 1. Now I'm going to factor. Is there a GCF here? Is there a GCF on number 4? Okay, so what method am I going to start with? Xbox. Okay, I want to see you guys setting up your Xbox and then show me your filled-in Xbox on your iPad. Okay, we're going to pause there. So get your Xbox filled in on your iPad, please. Okay, for the Xbox, when we fill it in, we have 3 on top, and negative 36 in the middle, and negative 5 down below. Looking for factors of negative 36 that add to negative 5. That's going to be negative 9 and 4. Simplifying the fraction, you get 1 over negative 3, and then 3/4 stays as it is. Writing this as a factored expression, you get b minus 3 times 3b plus 4. And then we will separate these using the zero product property. Okay, so when we use the zero product property, guys, up here, when we use the zero product property, we can split this up. So it goes b minus 3 equals 0, or 3b plus 4 equals 0. Solving each of those, the first one I just have to add 3 to both sides, so I get b equals 3. Check your signs on that if you missed it, that negative 3. The second one, I start by subtracting 4 from each side. That gives me 3b equals negative 4, and then I divide by 3 to get b by itself. So that gives me b equals negative 4/3. Okay, so for this example, we need to make it equal to 0. So to make it 0, we're going to subtract 4 to the other side. So that gives me 3a squared minus 4a minus 4 equals 0. Okay, and do we have a GCF here? No, so what's the method we're going to use to factor? Xbox. Okay, so I want you to work on your Xbox and finish the problem with your partner. Just give me your final answer on your iPad. Okay? Okay, so for the Xbox, you want 3 on either side, and then 3 times negative 4 gives you negative 12 up top. And on the bottom is negative 4. Okay, you're looking for factors of negative 12 that add to negative 4. So that would be negative 6 and positive 2. Okay, so use that. If you got stuck, use that to keep moving forward and find a final answer. Okay, so if I keep going through this, I'm going to look. I see 3 over negative 6 can be simplified. It's just 1 over negative 2. And then I write these as a factored expression. So I have 1 over 2 just goes to a minus 2. 3 over 2 goes to 3a plus 2. And it's still equal to 0. So now I set each of these equal to 0 using the zero product property. And then I solve for a in each of them. So the first equation, if I add 2, I get a equals 2. Second equation, I'm going to start by subtracting 2 on both sides. So I get 3a equals negative 2. Then I divide by 3. That gives me a equals negative 2/3. Okay, so check your signs. I saw a lot of negative 2's. For the first answer, it should be a positive 2. You got it. I have all 4 of them. Nice. Okay, so check your work here. Go ahead and write this down if you don't have it already, and we're going to get started on your homework. So that's it for today's lesson. Thank y'all.